The grand cathedral bells echoed through the misty morning air as Elena Martinez stood before the ornate mirror in her bridal chamber. Her hands trembled as she touched the delicate lace of her wedding dress, a family heirloom passed down through generations. At 22, she had imagined her wedding day countless times, but never like this, never as a transaction, never with tears streaming down her cheeks before the ceremony even began. Her father, Carlos Martinez, had been desperate. The family shipping business was drowning in debt, and their ancestral home in the Spanish countryside faced foreclosure. When the mysterious Lord Alexander Blackwood approached with an offer of marriage and financial salvation, Carlos saw it as divine intervention. Elena saw it as the death of her dreams. "Mija, you look beautiful," her mother Isabella whispered as she entered the room. Her eyes were red from crying, but she forced a smile. "Lord Blackwood he's a good man, wealthy, influential. You'll want for nothing." Elena turned away from the mirror. "Accept love, Mama. Accept choice." Her voice cracked. "I don't even know him." He appeared one day with his strange pale skin and cold eyes, offered Papa a fortune, and suddenly, I'm to be his bride. Isabella couldn't argue. Alexander Blackwood was indeed an enigma. He had arrived in their small Spanish town 3 weeks ago, dressed in expensive black clothing that seemed from another era. His English accent was refined, his manners impeccable, but there was something unsettling about him. He never seemed to eat at dinner gatherings. His skin was unnaturally cold when he kissed Elena's hand in greeting, and she had never seen him during daylight hours. The local townspeople whispered stories. Some said he was descended from ancient nobility. Others claimed he had made his fortune through mysterious means in distant lands. The more superstitious elderly women crossed themselves when his name was mentioned, muttering about old legends and creatures of the night. "The carriage is ready," Carlos announced from the doorway. His face showed the weight of his decision, but also relief. The wedding would save them all. Alexander had already transferred enough money to pay off their debts, with a promise of much more after the ceremony. As Elena walked toward the cathedral, she noticed how unusually quiet the town was. Most weddings brought celebration and crowds, but today felt somber. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. The only sounds were her heels clicking on the cobblestones and the distant toll of the church bells. Inside the cathedral, she was surprised by how few guests were present. Alexander's side was nearly empty except for a tall, thin man with silver hair who stood watching everything with keen eyes. Her own family and a handful of local friends filled only a few pews. Then she saw him waiting at the altar. Alexander Blackwood stood perfectly still, his black hair slicked back, wearing a tailored suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. He was undeniably handsome, with sharp features and an aristocratic bearing, but Elena felt a chill when their eyes met. His gaze was intense, almost predatory, and she had to fight the urge to turn and run. As she walked down the aisle, she noticed something that made her stumble slightly. Sitting in the front pew, barely visible behind the tall figure of Alexander's companion, was a small child. A little girl, perhaps 4 or 5 years old, with golden curls and the most beautiful green eyes Elena had ever seen. The child was dressed in a tiny black dress and was watching the proceedings with an intelligence that seemed far beyond her years. Elena had never heard Alexander mention having a child. In their brief, formal conversations during the courtship, he had revealed almost nothing about his personal life. He spoke of business, of his travels, of his estates in England, but never of family. The ceremony proceeded like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Elena found herself going through the motions, speaking the words when prompted, but feeling disconnected from everything happening around her. Alexander's responses were delivered in his deep, measured voice, but there was no warmth in them, no joy. It felt more like a business contract being finalized than a celebration of love. When the priest asked if there were any objections to the union, Elena held her breath, almost hoping someone would speak up. But the cathedral remained silent except for the echo of the priest's words. "You may kiss the bride," the priest announced. Alexander stepped closer. and Elena noticed again how cold his skin looked, how his dark eyes seemed to hold depths she couldn't fathom. When he lifted her veil and leaned in to kiss her, she felt a shock of cold that went through her entire body. His lips were like ice, and for a brief moment she could have sworn she felt something sharp brush against her lower lip. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, Elena's eyes immediately went to the little girl in the front pew. The child was standing now, and Elena could see her more clearly. She was breathtakingly beautiful, but there was something otherworldly about her. Her skin had the same pale quality as Alexander's, and when she smiled, Elena caught a glimpse of what looked like unusually sharp teeth. The wedding party moved to the reception hall in Alexander's newly acquired mansion on the outskirts of town. The building was ancient, with Gothic architecture that seemed to loom over the surrounding countryside. Elena had only seen it once before, during a brief tour Alexander had given her the week prior. It was magnificent but cold, filled with antique furniture and paintings of stern-looking ancestors she assumed were from Alexander's family line. During the reception, Elena found herself searching for the mysterious little girl she had seen at the ceremony, but the child seemed to have vanished. When she asked Alexander about her, he dismissed the question with a wave of his hand. "Children from the village sometimes wander into events," he said curtly. "Pay it no mind." But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. The way the child had been dressed, the way she had been sitting in the front pew as if she belonged there, suggested she was more than just a curious village child. As the evening wore on, Elena noticed other strange things about her new husband. He barely touched the food at the reception, though he was an attentive host to their guests. He seemed to grow more animated and comfortable as the sun set and darkness fell, and there were moments when she caught him watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. The guests began to leave as the night grew later, until finally it was just Elena and Alexander alone in the vast mansion. The servants had retired and the silence felt oppressive. "I trust you'll find your quarters comfortable," Alexander said, gesturing toward a grand staircase. "I've had them prepared specially for you." Elena followed him up the stairs, her wedding dress rustling against the stone steps. The hallways were lit by candles in ornate sconces, casting dancing shadows on the walls lined with portraits of pale aristocratic figures. He led her to a luxurious bedroom suite that had been decorated in rich burgundies and golds. It was beautiful, but it felt more like a museum display than a place where someone would actually live. "This is lovely," Elena said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Where will you be sleeping?" Alexander's expression remained neutral. "I keep unusual hours," he replied. "I thought it best if we maintained separate quarters, at least initially, while you adjust to your new life here." Elena felt a mixture of relief and confusion. On one hand, she was grateful not to have to share a bed with this stranger on their first night. On the other hand, it seemed odd for a newly married couple. "Alexander," she began hesitantly, "the little girl at the ceremony today, are you certain she was just a village child? She seemed—" "You're tired," he interrupted, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "Wedding days are overwhelming. I'm sure you imagined seeing more than was actually there." But Elena was certain of what she had seen. The child had been real, and she had clearly belonged there in some capacity. "With trust, Teddy." After Alexander left her alone in the room, Elena sat on the edge of the ornate bed, still wearing her wedding dress. She felt trapped, like a bird in a gilded cage. Everything about this situation felt wrong, but she couldn't identify exactly what was bothering her, beyond the obvious fact that she had married a stranger. As she prepared for bed, she heard something that made her freeze. It was the sound of a child's laughter, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere in the mansion. She moved to the window and looked out over the grounds, but saw nothing. The laughter came again, closer this time, followed by what sounded like footsteps in the hallway outside her room. Elena crept to the door and pressed her ear against it. She could hear whispered voices, one definitely that of a child, and another that sounded like Alexander. She couldn't make out the words, but the conversation seemed urgent. Curiosity overcoming caution, she slowly opened the door a crack and peered into the hallway. At the far end, she could see Alexander kneeling down to speak to the same little girl from the ceremony. The child was still wearing her black dress, and Elena could see that her golden curls seemed to glow in the candlelight. "Papa," the child's voice carried down the hallway, clear and sweet, "is the pretty lady going to be my new mama?" Elena's breath caught in her throat. Papa? Alexander had a daughter? But then why had he hidden this from her? Why had he pretended not to know the child at the ceremony? Alexander's response was too quiet for Elena to hear, but she saw him pick up the child and carry her toward another wing of the mansion. As they passed under one of the candle sconces, Elena noticed something that made her blood run cold. Neither Alexander nor the child cast a shadow on the wall. Elena quickly closed her door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. What kind of family had she married into? What was Alexander hiding from her? And who was this mysterious little girl who called him Papa but seemed to exist in the shadows of the mansion? As she finally changed out of her wedding dress and prepared for bed, Elena made a decision. Tomorrow, she would find answers. She would discover the truth about her new husband and the child who seemed to appear and disappear like a ghost. Whatever secrets this mansion held, whatever Alexander was hiding from her, she would uncover it. But as she lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the old mansion creak and settle around her, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that some secrets were better left buried. The cold kiss at the altar, the lack of shadows, the child's sharp teeth, Alexander's strange behavior during daylight hours. Everything pointed to something far more sinister than a simple arranged marriage. Outside her window, storm clouds gathered, and the wind began to howl through the trees surrounding the mansion. With trust, Teddy, it felt like an omen, a warning of the darkness that lay ahead. Elena pulled the covers up to her chin and closed her eyes. But sleep would not come easily on this, her first night as Mrs. Alexander Blackwood. In the distance, she could have sworn she heard that child's laughter again, carried on the wind like a haunting melody. Tomorrow, she would find the little girl. Tomorrow, she would demand answers. But tonight, she was alone in a strange house with a husband she didn't know and secrets that seemed to lurk in every shadow. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, and Elena finally drifted off to sleep, unaware that her new life was about to take a turn toward the supernatural, and that the little girl with the golden curls would soon change everything she thought she knew about reality. Elena woke to find herself alone in the vast mansion, with no sign of Alexander anywhere. The morning sun streamed through her bedroom windows, but the rest of the house seemed wrapped in an unnatural stillness. She had expected to begin her first day as a married woman with breakfast together, perhaps a conversation about their future plans, but instead she found only silence and empty rooms. After dressing in a simple blue morning dress, Elena ventured into the hallway. The mansion felt different in daylight, less ominous than it had the night before, but somehow more hollow. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floors as she searched for any sign of life. She found Mrs. Catherine Morrison, the head housekeeper, in the kitchen preparing what appeared to be lunch rather than breakfast. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Blackwood," Catherine said with a respectful curtsy. "I trust you slept well?" Elena glanced at the clock and was shocked to see it was nearly 1 in the afternoon. "I had no idea it was so late." "Where is my husband?" Catherine's expression became carefully neutral. "Master Alexander is resting. He typically sleeps during the day and is most active in the evening hours. He instructed me to ensure you had everything you needed." "Sleeping until afternoon? Is he unwell?" "It's simply his way. Has been for as long as I've worked for the family. He's a night person, you might say." Elena found this explanation strange, but decided not to press the matter with the servant. Instead, she asked about something more pressing. "Catherine, yesterday at the wedding, there was a little girl. Golden curls, green eyes, about 4 or 5 years old. Do you know who she might be?" Catherine's hands stilled on the silver she was polishing. For a moment, her composed expression faltered, and Elena caught a glimpse of something like fear in her eyes. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean, ma'am. Perhaps one of the village children wandered in during the festivities, but I heard her last night in the hallway. She was speaking to Alexander, and she called him Papa." The silver spoon Catherine had been holding clattered to the floor. She quickly bent to retrieve it, but when she straightened, her face had gone pale. "You must have been dreaming, Mrs. Blackwood. The excitement of the wedding day, the new surroundings. It's easy to imagine things." Elena could tell the woman was lying, but before she could press further, Catherine excused herself and hurried from the room. Elena was left alone with her growing suspicions and a determination to find answers. She spent the afternoon exploring the mansion, familiarizing herself with her new home. It was magnificent but cold, with room after room filled with antique furniture covered in dust cloths. Many of the rooms appeared unused, as if they were being preserved rather than lived in. As evening approached, Elena found herself in what appeared to be a library. The walls were lined with ancient books, many in languages she couldn't identify. Those pictures fill literally with their bindings that seemed to crumble at the slightest touch. She was examining a particularly ornate book when she heard footsteps behind her. "Finding everything to your satisfaction?" Alexander's voice made her jump. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, looking immaculate despite having allegedly slept all day. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his clothes were without a wrinkle, and his pale skin seemed to have an almost luminous quality in the lamplight. "The house is beautiful," Elena said carefully, "though I admit it feels quite large for just the two of us." Alexander moved closer, his movements unusually graceful and silent. "You'll grow accustomed to it. The Blackwood family has owned this estate for centuries. There's a great deal of history within these walls." "Speaking of family," Elena said, gathering her courage, "I was wondering about the little girl I saw yesterday. Catherine seemed quite startled when I mentioned her." Alexander's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "I told you last night it was likely a village child. You shouldn't trouble the servants with questions about imaginary sightings." "I didn't imagine it, Alexander. I saw her clearly, and I heard her voice. She called you Papa." For a moment, something flickered across Alexander's features. Surprise, anger, perhaps even fear. But it was gone so quickly that Elena almost thought she had imagined it. "You're clearly still adjusting to your new circumstances," he said, his voice taking on a condescending tone. "Perhaps you should rest more, eat better. Mrs. Morrison tells me you barely touched your lunch." Elena felt frustrated by his dismissive attitude. "I'm not some delicate flower who can't trust her own senses. I know what I saw and heard." Alexander stepped closer, and Elena noticed again how cold his presence seemed. The temperature in the room actually seemed to drop when he was near. "Elena," he said, and there was something hypnotic about the way he spoke her name. "You've had a significant change in your life. It's natural for your mind to play tricks on you. Trust me when I tell you there is no child in this house." For a moment, Elena felt herself beginning to believe him. His voice was so convincing, so authoritative. But then she remembered the conversation she had overheard, the way the little girl had looked directly at her during the ceremony, and she shook off the strange compulsion she had felt to agree with him. "I'd like to see more of the house," she said firmly. "All of it. Surely as your wife I should be familiar with my new home." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Some areas of the mansion are private, Elena. Family quarters that have been sealed for generations. There's nothing there that would interest you." "Everything about this house interests me now. It's my home too." They stared at each other for a long moment, and Elena could see a battle playing out behind Alexander's dark eyes. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Very well. Tomorrow evening, I'll give you a complete tour. But tonight, I have business to attend to. I'll be leaving shortly and won't return until late." After Alexander left, Elena found herself alone once again, but this time she was determined not to simply wait around. If her husband wouldn't give her answers, she would find them herself. She began systematically exploring the parts of the mansion she hadn't yet seen, looking for any clue about the mysterious child or Alexander's strange behavior. Most of what she found were more unused rooms, storage areas, and servant quarters. It was nearly midnight when she discovered the locked door. She had been making her way through what appeared to be the oldest section of the mansion when she found a heavy wooden door that refused to open. Unlike the other rooms, this one had no dust on the handle, suggesting it was used regularly. More importantly, she could see light seeping from underneath it. Elena pressed her ear to the door and listened. At first, she heard nothing, but then came the faint sound of music, a lullaby being hummed in a sweet, childish voice. Her heart pounding, Elena tried the door again, pushing against it with more force. It was definitely locked, but as she examined the frame, she noticed the wood around the lock was old and slightly warped. If she could find something to slip between the door and the frame, she hurried back to the kitchen and found a thin butter knife. It took several minutes of careful maneuvering, but finally she heard the satisfying click of the lock giving way. Elena slowly opened the door, not sure what she would find beyond it. What she discovered took her breath away. The room was clearly a child's nursery, but unlike any nursery she had ever seen. It was decorated in rich burgundies and blacks, with elegant furniture that seemed to be miniature versions of the adult furniture throughout the mansion. Toys were scattered around the room, but they were expensive dolls and intricate puzzles that looked more like works of art than playthings. And there, sitting in the middle of the room, playing with what appeared to be a dollhouse replica of the mansion itself, was the little girl. She looked up as Elena entered, and smiled with a brightness that seemed to illuminate the entire room. "I wondered when you would find me," the child said in perfect English, though her accent carried hints of something older, something that reminded Elena of ancient languages she couldn't place. Elena stood frozen in the doorway, not sure whether to be relieved that she hadn't been imagining things or terrified of what this discovery might mean. "Hello," Elena managed to say. "What's your name?" "I'm Sophia," the little girl replied, standing gracefully and smoothing down her dark dress. "Sophia Blackwood. And you're my new mama, aren't you?" Elena felt the world tilt around her. "Blackwood? You're Alexander's daughter?" Sophia nodded seriously. "Papa said I wasn't supposed to talk to you yet. He said you needed time to adjust. But I got lonely, and I could hear you walking around the house, looking for me." Elena moved closer, studying the child's face. She was even more beautiful up close, with skin that had the same pale, almost luminous quality as Alexander's. Her green eyes seemed ancient despite her apparent age, and there was an intelligence in them that was unsettling. "Why didn't your father tell me about you?" Elena asked, kneeling down to be at eye level with Sophia. Sophia tilted her head thoughtfully. "Papa is always very careful about who he tells about our family. He says some people wouldn't understand us." "Understand what?" Before Sophia could answer, Elena heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Heavy, familiar footsteps that could only belong to Alexander. "You have to go," Sophia whispered urgently. "Papa will be very angry if he finds you here before he's ready." But it was too late. The footsteps had stopped just outside the door, and Elena could feel a presence in the doorway behind her. "Elena." Alexander's voice was deadly quiet, with an undertone that made Elena's skin crawl. She turned slowly to face him, and what she saw made her take an involuntary step backward. Alexander stood in the doorway, but he looked nothing like the composed aristocrat she had married. His eyes seemed to glow with an inhuman light. His lips were pulled back to reveal teeth that were definitely not normal, and there was something predatory and dangerous in his posture. "Papa, don't be angry," Sophia said, moving to stand beside Elena. "I like her. She's pretty and kind, and she was looking for me because she cares." Alexander's terrifying expression softened slightly as he looked at his daughter, but when his gaze returned to Elena, the coldness was back. You were told this area of the house was private, he said. Elena found her voice despite her fear. You lied to me. You told me there was no child, but she's your daughter. How could you hide something so important from your wife? Because, Alexander said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him, there are things about my family that you're not ready to understand. Things that would terrify most people. Try me, Elena said, though her voice shook. I'm stronger than you think. Alexander looked at his daughter, who nodded encouragingly. Tell her, Papa. She already knows something is different about us. Elena watched as Alexander seemed to wage an internal battle. Finally, his shoulders sagged slightly, and he moved to sit in one of the child-sized chairs, looking suddenly weary. Elena, he said quietly, what I'm about to tell you will change everything. Once you know the truth, there will be no going back to the innocent woman who married me yesterday. Elena's heart was pounding, but she lifted her chin defiantly. I married a stranger and moved into a house full of secrets. My innocence was already lost. Alexander nodded slowly. Very well. The truth is that Sophia and I are not entirely human. We are vampires, Elena. We have lived for centuries, sustained by blood, existing in the shadows between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Elena stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for some indication that this was an elaborate joke. But looking at his serious expression, at Sophia's solemn nod, at the way neither of them seemed quite real in the lamplight, she realized he was telling the truth. Vampires, she repeated numbly. Papa is over 300 years old, Sophia added helpfully, and I've been 5 years old for almost 50 years now. Elena sank into a chair, her mind reeling. Vampires. It explains so much. The cold skin, the lack of shadows, the strange behavior, the way they both seem to exist slightly outside of normal reality. Why did you marry me? She whispered. Alexander's expression became even more grave. Because, Elena, Sophia needs a mother. Not just any mother, but one who is pure of heart and strong of spirit. She's been alone for too long, and despite what we are, she's still a child. She needs love, care, guidance. And you thought you could just buy me? Use my family's financial desperation to acquire a mother for your daughter? I thought I could provide for you while you provided for her. I thought it could be a mutually beneficial arrangement. Teddy. Elena looked at Sophia, who was watching the conversation with those unsettling green eyes. Despite everything she had just learned, despite the fear coursing through her veins, Elena felt her heart go out to the little girl. Vampire or not, she was clearly lonely and in need of affection. What happens now? Elena asked. Now that I know what you are. Alexander's expression darkened. That depends entirely on you, Elena. You have two choices. You can accept us as we are, stay in this house, and become part of our family. Or, he didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Elena looked back and forth between the vampire lord and his immortal child daughter, realizing that her new marriage had just become infinitely more complicated than she had ever imagined. The crying bride from yesterday seemed like a different person entirely compared to the woman who now sat in a vampire's nursery trying to decide the fate of her own soul. Elena sat in stunned silence for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. The weight of Alexander's revelation pressed down on her like a physical force. Vampires. The word kept echoing in her mind, along with all the implications it carried. I need time to think, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander nodded curtly. Of course. But Elena, you must understand that what you've learned tonight cannot leave this room. There are those who would use this knowledge to harm us, and I will protect my daughter at any cost. The threat in his voice was unmistakable, but when Elena looked at Sophia, she saw something that changed everything. The little girl's green eyes were filled with tears, and she was looking at Elena with an expression of desperate hope mixed with fear. Are you going to leave us? Sophia asked in a small voice. Everyone always leaves when they find out what we are. Elena's heart broke. Whatever these two were, however impossible their existence seemed, Sophia was still a child who had been hurt before, a child who was afraid of being abandoned again. "I'm not going anywhere tonight," Elena said gently, "but I need to understand more. How did this happen to you? How did you become vampires?" Alexander finished. "It's not a pleasant story, Elena. Tell me anyway." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, then began speaking in a voice that carried the weight of centuries. "I was born in England in 1702, the youngest son of a nobleman. I had a normal life, a normal future planned. Until I was 28 years old, I had fallen in love with a young woman named Victoria, and we were to be married." He paused, his expression growing distant with memory. "But there was another who desired her, an ancient creature who had been watching her, stalking her. When Victoria rejected his advances, he took his revenge by attacking our wedding party. Victoria was killed, along with most of our guests. I was changed." "He turned you into a vampire," Elena said. "Yes. For decades, I existed in darkness and rage, feeding on whoever crossed my path. I became the very monster that had destroyed my life. It wasn't until I met Sophia that I began to remember my humanity." Elena turned to look at Sophia, who had been listening to this story with the solemnity of someone who had heard it many times before. "What about you, sweetheart? How did you—" "I was dying," Sophia said simply. "It was 1975, and I was in a hospital in London. The doctor said I had leukemia and that I wouldn't live much longer. Papa found me there." Alexander's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. She was so brave, lying in that hospital bed, comforting other children who were crying for their parents. The nurses called her their little angel. She was dying, but she was more concerned about everyone else's pain. "Papa saved me," Sophia continued. "He gave me forever instead of just a few more weeks." Elena felt tears stinging her eyes. "You turned a dying child into a vampire?" "I gave her life," Alexander said defensively. "Yes, it came with a price, but she was going to die anyway. At least this way she could continue to exist, to experience things, to be loved. But she'll never grow up. She'll be 5 years old forever." "I know the weight of what I did," Alexander said quietly. "Every day I question whether I had the right to make that choice for her. But when I look at her smile, when I hear her laugh, I can't bring myself to regret it entirely." Elena studied Sophia more carefully. Despite her childlike appearance, there was definitely something ancient in her eyes, a wisdom that came from decades of existence. "Do you regret it?" Elena asked her directly. "Being turned into a vampire?" Sophia considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like to grow up, to have children of my own someday. But mostly, I'm grateful. I got to see the world change, to read thousands of books, to learn languages and music and art, and I got to have Papa." "But you're lonely," Elena observed. Sophia nodded. "Very lonely. Papa tries, but he's busy with his business dealings, and he worries so much about keeping us safe. I spend a lot of time alone in my room, playing with toys that bore me or reading books I've already read 50 times. Elena felt a tug at her heart. "What do you want from me, Sophia? If I stayed, what would you want our relationship to be like?" Sophia's face lit up. "I want someone to talk to who doesn't treat me like I'm made of glass. I want someone to play games with me and read me new stories and maybe teach me about normal human things. I want someone who could love me even knowing what I am. And you, Alexander," Elena turned to her husband. "What do you want from this arrangement?" Alexander was quiet for a long time. "I want Sophia to have a chance at happiness. But I also—" He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "I've been alone for so long, Elena. Yes, I have Sophia, but I've never had a companion, someone who could understand the weight of what we are. I thought perhaps if you could accept us, you might also provide something I didn't even realize I was missing. Companionship." Elena said. Yes, and perhaps, eventually, something more. Elena stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the moon was full and bright, casting silver light over the mansion's grounds. She thought about her old life, the one that had been planned for her. Marriage to a human man, children, growing old together, dying in her bed, surrounded by grandchildren. That future was gone now, regardless of what choice she made. If I stay, she said slowly, what would my life be like? Would you expect me to become like you? No, Alexander said firmly. I would never force that change on anyone. You could remain human for as long as you wished, perhaps forever. But I would age while you both stayed the same. Yes, and I would die while you both continued on. Yes. Elena turned back to face them. That doesn't seem like much of a life for any of us. Maybe not, Alexander admitted, but it would be something. And perhaps, if you ever chose to join us permanently, that could be arranged as well. But only if you chose it, Elena. Only if you truly wanted it. Elena looked at Sophia, who was watching her with those hopeful green eyes. If I stayed, would I be safe? Would you hurt me? Never, Alexander said without hesitation. I feed, yes, but I'm not a mindless monster. I've learned to survive without killing, without harming innocents. You would be completely safe. What about the outside world? My family? They would be told that you're happy in your new marriage, living abroad. They could visit occasionally, though we would need to be very careful about what they saw. Elena took a deep breath. She thought about her parents, about the life she was leaving behind, about the impossibility of what she was considering. But then she looked at Sophia again, and she thought about the loneliness she had seen in the child's eyes. Can I see the rest of your world? She asked finally. Before I make my decision, I want to understand what I would truly be agreeing to. Alexander nodded. That's fair. Tomorrow night, I'll show you everything. How we live, how we feed, what our existence really entails. You should make an informed choice. And if I decide I can't do this, Alexander's expression grew grave. Then we'll make arrangements for you to return to your family safely, though the knowledge you now possess would need to be handled carefully. Elena didn't ask what that meant. She was fairly certain she didn't want to know. The next evening, Alexander was true to his word. He showed Elena parts of his world she could never have imagined. He took her to the mansion's lower levels, where ancient chambers held artifacts from centuries past. He showed her the library's hidden sections, filled with books on supernatural history and vampire lore. Most importantly, he let her see how he truly lived. Elena watched from the shadows as Alexander fed, approaching a man who was already dying from consumption in the village below. Instead of killing him, Alexander took only what he needed, leaving the man unconscious but alive, with no memory of the encounter. I choose only those who are already ill or dying, he explained as they made their way back to the mansion. I take just enough to sustain myself, and I ensure they feel no pain. It's not the same as the monsters from stories who slaughter villages, but it's still taking something without consent, Elena pointed out. Yes, Alexander admitted. It's a moral compromise I make to survive. I'm not proud of it, but I'm also not willing to let Sophia face the world alone. Over the course of 3 days, Elena learned about every aspect of their existence. She saw how Sophia spent her days, educated by private tutors who believed she was simply a sickly child who couldn't attend regular school. She learned about Alexander's business dealings, legitimate enterprises that provided them with wealth and allowed them to move through human society undetected. She also came to understand the profound loneliness that permeated their existence. On the 3rd night, as Elena sat in Sophia's room reading her a bedtime story, the little girl interrupted her. You're going to stay, aren't you? Sophia said quietly. Elena looked down at the child curled up beside her. In the past few days, she had grown genuinely fond of Sophia. The little girl was intelligent, funny, and despite her supernatural nature, she was still very much a child in need of love and guidance. What makes you think that? The way you look at Papa when you think he isn't watching, and the way you tuck me in, like you're already my mama. Elena smiled. You're very observant. I've had a lot of practice watching people. So you are staying? Elena was quiet for a moment. Sophia, what if I told you that I'm staying not because I'm not afraid, but because even though I am afraid, I care about you too much to leave? Sophia's face broke into the brightest smile Elena had ever seen. I'd say that's what real love is. Papa told me once that love isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared but choosing to stay anyway. Later that night, Elena found Alexander in his study, working by lamplight on what appeared to be business correspondence. I've made my decision, she said from the doorway. He looked up, his expression carefully neutral. And I'm staying. Alexander's relief was visible. Are you certain? Once you're truly part of our world, Elena, there will be no going back. I'm certain, but I have conditions. Name 'em. First, no more lies between us. If I'm to be part of this family, I need to know everything. Every danger, every secret, every aspect of what we're facing. Agreed. Second, I want to continue being myself. I won't become some gothic creature hiding from the sun. I want to maintain connections to the human world as much as possible. Reasonable. Third, if I ever decide I want to become like you, it will be my choice and mine alone. No pressure, no manipulation, no emergency transformations to save my life. If it happens, it will be because I freely choose it. Alexander nodded solemnly. You have my word. And finally, Elena said, stepping into the room, I want this to be a real marriage, eventually, not just an arrangement for Sophia's benefit. I want us to try to build something genuine together. Alexander stood up, moving toward her slowly. Elena, you should know that I'm capable of love, but I'm also capable of great darkness. I've done terrible things in my long existence. Are you truly prepared for that? Elena reached up and touched his cold cheek. Alexander, I married a stranger and discovered he was a vampire with an immortal daughter. I think I can handle a few dark secrets. For the first time since she had known him, Alexander smiled genuinely. Then welcome to our family, Elena Blackwood. As he leaned down to kiss her, Elena realized that her tears on their wedding day had been for the death of one life, but perhaps they had also been the birth of something entirely new, something impossible and frightening and beautiful all at the same time. 6 months later, Elena stood in the same nursery where she had first met Sophia, but now it was filled with laughter and warmth. Sophia was teaching Elena a song in an ancient language, and Elena was helping Sophia with a puzzle that depicted famous landmarks from around the world. Mama, Sophia said suddenly, looking up from the puzzle, do you ever regret choosing us? Elena smiled, thinking of all the ways her life had changed. She had learned to navigate a world of secrets and shadows. She had discovered love with a man who was far more complex than she could have imagined. And she had become a mother to a child who would never age but who filled her days with joy and wonder. Never, Elena said, pulling Sophia into her arms. Not for a single moment. Outside, Alexander was returning from his evening business, and Elena could hear his footsteps on the stairs. In a few minutes, he would join them, and they would be a family again. An unusual family, certainly, but a family nonetheless. Elena had chosen a life that defied everything she had thought she wanted. And in doing so, she had found something she hadn't even known she needed. Love, purpose, and a place where she truly belonged, even if that place existed in the shadows between the human and supernatural worlds. As Sophia's laughter filled the room and Alexander's footsteps grew closer, Elena realized that sometimes the most terrifying choices led to the most extraordinary destinations, and sometimes the family you never expected was exactly the family you were always meant to have.